the Gospel of St. Mark, the 10th chapter, the 2nd through the 12th verses. And the topic, my beloved class, is it lawful? Is it lawful? He that has an ear, let him hear what Christ teach today. What is truly legal in the sight of God? Is it lawful? Means what is truly legal in the sight of God. Remember this proverb as we go throughout this lesson. There is a way that appears to be right, but the end of it leads to death. Proverbs, the 14th chapter and the 12th verse. The lesson from the Gospel of St. Mark, the 10th chapter, especially starting at the 2nd verse. And the Pharisees came to him and asked him, is it lawful for a man to put away his wife? Tempting him. Mark, the 10th chapter and the 2nd verse. The word lawful means that which is legal, that which is permitted, and that which has authority or has been authorized. However, the gospel writer of St. Matthew's gospel, you'll find it more clearer in the 22nd chapter and the 26th verse. It teaches the Pharisees were not sincerely seeking truth. They were attempting to trap Jesus with, listen to me carefully, a political and religious question. Class, to understand this lesson, we must remember that throughout Christ's earthly ministry, the Son of God had many enemies. Among them were a political party that supported the Gentile ordained king organization. The kings over the Jews that the Romans appointed, which was the Herod family line. This was a royal family that was appointed by Rome to rule over the Jews. And this political party was called or this religious party, was called the Sadducees and the Pharisees. And they were the leading religious leaders of God's Israel. Though these groups disagreed on many matters, I hope y'all can hear me, they shared two common goals. And that was to maintain peace with Rome. And they were both opposers against God's Christ. Listen, the spirit of opposition against Christ had been present from the beginning of his birth. Herod the Great sought to kill the Christ child, but failed, and then he died. Yet the same spirit of hostility towards God's anointed continued in his descendants, continued in his seed, and most dominant in his male children. If John, who wrote the Revelation, was here, if John, who wrote 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, was here, he will look deeper into that family and see the spirit of the Antichrist. Listen, class, this discussion of what is lawful, this is what you got to understand. This debate about what is lawful took place in the region, in the territory, in the same community where John the Baptist had boldly confronted Herod Antipas, one of the sons of Herod the Great. You can find this in the Gospel of St. Mark, the 6th chapter, and the 17th through the 19th verse. And he said what 2 Samuel, the 12th chapter, and the 7th verse said, "You are the man." For Herod Antipas took his brother's Philip's wife, and John, in past history in that same area, had declared that the relationship of the Roman appointed king over the Jews was unlawful. Herod Antipas, listen to this, considered himself a Jew. His father was a Gentile, but his mother was a Samaritan, which in the Jewish world, he was not considered a thoroughbred Jew. But he had the Roman government backing him up. Yet he followed the unlawful interpretation of marriage that at that time had been taught by religious leaders. Listen, they had reduced marriage to a contract that could be dissolved whenever a husband desired, rather than honoring God's covenant with marriage. Listen, the Pharisees knew exactly in this lesson what they were doing when they asked Jesus, "Is it lawful?" Remember what Matthew said. They were not seeking for truth. They hoped he would answer as John had done. They hoped that the same mindset that John the Baptist had some months later on this here question, he would be of the same mindset, which it would place him in conflict with Herod Antipas' household. And this would provide another reason why the Pharisees and the Sadducees should kill him. But listen, Jesus answered in the Gospel of St. Mark, the 10th chapter and the 3rd verse. What did Moses command you? Then in Mark, the 10th chapter and the 4th verse, they said, Moses permitted a certificate of divorce. And then in Mark, the 10th chapter and the 5th verse, Jesus answered, because of the hardness of your father's hearts, because of the meanness, the nastiness, the harshness of your father's hearts, he gave this certificate. Not because divorce reflected God's will or God's perfect will. Listen, Moses allowed it, Jesus said. He gave this provision so that the women could be, or the wife could be protected from greater injustice, from being cast out, from being abused physically, and as we heard and we've seen in these last days, from even being murdered. It was not to encourage the breaking of the marriage covenant. Jesus taught in Matthew 10, chapter in the 5th verse. Now, Jesus knew that this wasn't good enough for his enemies because they did not seek edification. They were seeking his damnation. But in Mark, the 10th chapter, the 6th through the 9th verses, Jesus went beyond Moses to the beginning of creation. He went to the book that Moses wrote and said, God created one man. Listen, Christians, God created one man and one woman. His design was that a man should leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, cleave, lock in with his wife, and those who were two should become one flesh spiritually, mentally, and physically. They were no longer according to God's math, 2, but 1. Therefore, Jesus' teaching taught no human tradition, no human interpretation, no human authority or religious opinion has the right to separate what God has joined together. You can find that teaching of Jesus in the Gospel of St. Mark, the 10th chapter and the 9th verse. But in St. Mark, class, the 10th chapter, starting at the 10th verse, disciples questioned Jesus privately. Now you got to listen with the ear concerning this topic. They understood the danger of his teaching. Can I say that one more time? They understood, the 12, the danger of his teaching, because they realized that John had lost his head for standing on this truth. And they realized that if Jesus continued proclaiming the same doctrine, what would happen to him? And they understood that what happens to him would happen to them. So Jesus, there's got to be a breaking point. There's got to be some compromising. You're talking about royalty. You're talking about men of authority. You're talking about religious leaders who say that they have brought out Moses' teaching with more clarity. Well, in the Gospel of St. Mark, the 10th chapter through the 11th and the 12th verse, Jesus did not compromise. I know what these people do with people who teach like I do. But Jesus did not compromise. This is what he said. He declared. He got stronger with his disciples. He got more clearer with his disciples. He declared that whoever divorces a spouse for the selfish reasons being taught by these false religious teachers and marries another commits adultery. Likewise, the woman who leaves her husband, if he is a king, based on the teaching of these false religious leaders, and marries another, she commits adultery. Jesus' message was clear. It did not matter whether one was King Herod Antipas. It did not matter if his second wife was the queen of his other brother. It did not matter if they were political leaders who supported the Herod royal family and had his finance and his military back. It did not matter if there was religious leaders who were caught up in covetousness, who were caught up in rather hearing the praises of men rather than the praises of God. God's law, that's what Jesus was teaching. God's law is above every throne, King Herod, Antipas, every political party, the Herodians, every religious tradition, the Pharisees and the Sadducees. What God has declared lawful cannot be overturned by man. And what God has declared sinful cannot be made lawful by human authority. Listen, class. The lesson teaches that God's original design for marriage remains as his standard. Human hardness, human rage may produce compromising, concede, which means acceptance. But it can never change God's holy purpose. Listen to this, class, as I come down to the end of this lesson. The true question is not what men permit, is it lawful, but what God has established from the beginning is lawful. The true question is not what men permit to be lawful, but what God has established from the beginning is lawful. Our next class will be coming from the Gospel of St. Mark, the 10th chapter, the 13th through the 16th verses. And the key verse will be taken from Mark, the 10th chapter and the 16th verse, where it reads, "And he took them up in his arms, laid his hands on them, and blessed them." The topic is, he blessed the significance. He blessed the significance. God bless you, people of God, until we meet again.